What do you want, Osha?
Elephant green screen effect.
The Acolyte has received so much criticism since its release that future seasons were completely cancelled. This show seems to be one of those more divisive Star Wars projects, but frankly, unlike the sequels, this show doesn't come off nearly as divisive as the sequels were. Because if you just look up any reviews for this show, you will find that most of them are negative. Of course, there are the fans, but I'm not someone who is going to be convinced by any of their arguments, because after giving the show a pretty fair chance, I'm not convinced. This is some of the worst Star Wars I have seen, and to me represents a brand new low for Star Wars, which I know is not something that is, original to say. Every bit of potential the show has is totally wasted, and even though there are some good details and directing choices that I liked, I can't ignore the very, very poor writing. However, it's not just the poor writing, it's also the fact that this show does quite a bit of lore desecration, as I call it. And so it is with the mating of the powers of lore desecration and poor writing that merits such a poor response for the show. And this is despite all of the anti-SJW responses, which, as you know by now, usually just boil down to snide comments against woke, DEI, and other nonsense they perceive as culturally problematic. I've grown past this point because it just doesn't matter to me, so this is not going to affect my review of The Acolyte. So now, let's get started with part 1. The Acolyte is set about a century before the events of the prequels, during the final era of the Jedi Order's golden age. The story begins when Jedi Master Indara is murdered by a mysterious masked warrior. The investigation led by Jedi Master Sol uncovers that the suspect appears to be Osha Anaseya, a former Jedi Padawan who left the Order years earlier after a tragedy on her homeworld of Brendok. Osha insists she is innocent, and it is soon revealed that the true killer is her twin sister, May Anaseya, whom Osha believed dead since childhood. As the story unfolds, Sol and the Jedi pursue May across the galaxy while gradually uncovering the truth about what happened on Brendok 16 years earlier. Osha and May were raised within a Force-sensitive coven of witches led by their mothers. The Jedi, including Sol, Kalnaka, Torben, and Indara, encountered the coven and feared the children's future. Tensions escalated into violence and fire, resulting in the apparent destruction of the coven and the separation of the twins. Sol rescued Osha and brought her into the Jedi Order, while May survived believing the Jedi had stolen her sister and massacred her family. May is secretly working under a mysterious dark side master known as the Stranger, later identified as Keemir. Keemir manipulates May into hunting the Jedi connected to Brendok as a part of a Sith-like philosophy centered on freedom from Jedi control. Eventually, he reveals himself openly after massacring several Jedi in a brutal confrontation. Keemir defeats many of the pursuing Jedi, exposing how unprepared and complacent the Order has become during the supposedly peaceful age. Osha, meanwhile, becomes increasingly disillusioned with the Jedi as hidden truths about Brendok emerge, especially Sol's role in the deaths of her family and the Jedi cover-up afterward. In the climax, Sol finally confesses the truth. He killed May and Osha's mother during the chaos on Brendok, believing he was protecting Osha and acting for the greater good. The revelation shatters Osha's trust in him. Consumed by grief and anger, Osha taps into the dark side and kills Sol herself using the Force. The series ends by hinting at deeper Sith involvement behind the scenes, including a brief appearance by Darth Plagueis observing events from the shadows, implying that the rise of the Sith is already quietly underway beneath the Jedi Order's blind confidence. So with all of that being said, it actually doesn't sound like the show is that bad, but let's have a closer look. The most complicated part of this story has to be the twins, because there is just so much chaos between them. Neither of them are particularly interesting, May definitely being the worst of the two, and despite me thinking that Amanda Stenberg did a fine job in the roles, some weird dialogue exchanges, and overall uninteresting dynamic and failed emotional beats just couldn't captivate me. I did like the diverging paths they were showing throughout the show, but it's just so soiled because the growth is so one-sided. Osha gets a lot of attention, but I don't even feel like she changes much. Her grief is believable enough, and the choice of letting her kill Sol was justified. I did scoff a little after she almost cried just after killing him, because, I mean, come on, you knew you were doing it without asking any questions, and that is a little silly to me. May, as I stated previously, is the worst offender. She is a killer, a betrayer, creepily possessive, and changes to the loving sister in the end, who is also spared because of a mind wipe. She starts off by killing Jedi, which is dope, but then that is completely forgotten because Osha is alive. Like the flick of a switch, her entire purpose changes with no resistance. What makes it worse is that the love she shows is pretty much the same as when she was a child. And so I find it so hard to believe that this character can then change on a dime once again because her sister is sad. It doesn't click for me. Nothing in this show that she does makes me think that she is a victim in any way. Other characters are also nothing special either. Master Sol, portrayed by Lee Jun-jae, was pretty good for the most part, but his obsession with Osha came with just very little reasoning, and it came too suddenly. And that kind of just brings the character down for me. And what doesn't help his case is the fact that he is just done so dirty. He's killed by Osha, and then is pretty much buried because of a cover-up. Again, I think that Lee Jun-jae did an excellent job, but it makes me a bit sad that this character was wasted on this show like this. Kimir is not that bad of a character, honestly. He has presence, he is menacing, and he is edgy in the right ways. But my biggest problem with him has more to do with lore, which I'm going to talk about later. As for the other characters, I don't really have much to say. Some of them are literally just there to die, and that's it. Yeah. By far though, my biggest problem with this show's writing is the amount of plot convenience that there is here on show. And if you want an example, just look at the first episode with the prison ship escape. It's a ship piloted by droids, and the Jedi are sending someone they just arrested into the ship, and they don't even follow them. I mean, it screams plot convenience because it makes it so Sol and her will reunite, but still, there are other things, like in episode 7, Torben's whole motivation for wanting to leave Brendok is that this is boring, or that he needs a reason for the plot to become somehow more complicated, so he has to do something. And sure, yeah, I know he gets possessed, but it doesn't overwrite his initial reason for being paranoid. All of the Basil stuff, along with how it shifted the show's tone to the lighthearted, which just has absolutely no place in this show. And I just don't like a kooky fun scene where May gets attacked by an alien, gets sprayed in the face by a droid. It comes totally out of left field, and the earlier dialogue in this episode, being episode 6, also enters the realm of funny banter. This show has taken quite a bit of time to make itself serious, so why this tonal shift? It only makes the show worse. Back to the plot conveniences, there's also the mind wipe, which really just felt like plot armor for the sake of a second season, so that May would be alive for it. Kimir's helmet being conveniently off in the final episode so that the Jedi would be able to sense him and thus plant a seed for season 2. It's things like this that cheapen the plot so much, and once again, it just makes me feel like the plot only moves because it has to. There are really no sound reasons why. Another thing that I just take so much issue with is the fact that the Jedi are trying to cover this up. The politicking that they do in the show is so poorly developed and barely gets any attention. So vague mentions of, oh, senators are going to vote this down or complain about it. And that suddenly motivates the Order to simply cover up perhaps the first sighting of a Sith in the centuries. I really don't understand this. When you start making questions like this, the show kind of falls apart because it has a lot to explain, but it doesn't really explain much at all. You would think that if the Sith are the ancient mortal enemies of the Jedi, that this would be important for the whole order to get in on, that they would be aware of Khemir and the reborn Sith. So it kind of just ends up undermining the prequels for no particular reason. Because, I mean, think about it. If the Jedi Order knew that to train an emotionally unstable 8-year-old person of dubious origin didn't work out before, as in with Osha, why would they be doing it in the prequels? And if the Jedi were aware of the Sith during this period, why are they so aloof in the prequels? And you see, it's these problematic questions that we'll never get answers to, because, frankly, what answer is there to give? Now for some more miscellaneous stuff. The pacing is fine, but the structure is just a bit strange. It's 2 episodes of the present, a flashback episode, 3 more present-day episodes, another flashback episode, and then the finale. The finale. I don't think the structure is inherently wrong, but the changing of perspective in episodes 3 and 7 left me with the impression of something poorly developed just to get the script going, as I have talked about previously. The destruction of the Coven was too unbelievable at first, but the fullest extent only being revealed later flattens the emotional core the show is trying for. Didn't have enough of a reason to care then, I don't care now because it wasn't that good anyway. The dialogue was okay, I guess. There are some examples of good and bad, but most of it is completely okay. And all of these things that I'm saying about the show have nothing to do with the things that really annoy me, which I think we will get into now in part 2. So not only is the show a letdown by itself, what angers me as a fan is the amount of rewriting of lore and the inconsistencies that exist here. The most believable fact about the show was that it was written by a team who hadn't written Star Wars before. On the surface, I don't think this is a bad thing. There are a ton of projects where they will grab people from outside to help out, but it does require guidance. This show had none of that, and so it parades around with these big things in the lore because the writers just didn't have those questions in mind. Needless to say, to a fan like myself who cares about consistent lore, it's an insult. When Lucasfilm and the writers keep going back and forth about what they'll show and what's allowed, it's frustrating, especially when we consider the fact that it doesn't have to be like this. And to go into more depth about this, what exacerbates this issue is that Dave Filoni, the new creative head of Lucasfilms, has supposedly stated that consistent lore is secondary to good stories. It's why stupid lore shit like the Crow actually being a wimp because Ahsoka is OP despite him handing Maul's ass to him in Shadow Lord. I don't think it's idealistic to think that they are capable of sticking to one vision and working with what they have. The merit of good lore writing is that you accept the restrictions it creates, as it forces new concepts and makes the overall experience far more earned and cohesive. Legends was a mess of continuity, sure, but when they locked in, like with the new Jedi Order novels, they could have one line where everything fits as it should. This campfire story approach to Star Wars lore is my biggest problem with Star Wars these days. Now, before I get into my rant about this show particularly, I do have to clarify one thing, which is that I will be using examples from Legends, which I know some people may dislike. And if you are the type of person who takes issue with that, well, then don't be upset, because I'm really just following Disney's example here. They have been lifting things from Legends for about as long as they've made the new canon. They mostly come in the form of concepts, sure, like the Sith Eternal being very similar to the Dark Empire, Ben Solo basically getting Jason Solo's spot, the recanonization of characters like Revan or Dirge, but there are also almost total copies like Thrawn and Darth Bane. It ranges from small mentions like the Rakatan Infinite Empire to the Ahsoka series being similar to Heir to the Empire. They're unlikely to stop borrowing from Legends, and I believe they absolutely should. 30 plus years of storytelling, lore tidbits, and gradual evolution shouldn't simply be ignored when we still can glean so much from it.
I'm not of the belief that Legends should somehow be recanonized. I'm open to a new continuity with fresh stories and a reimagining of some story arcs, even if I still want the Legends banner to still receive some attention. So then, what are the lore mistakes this show commits? It's not because this didn't shape up the exact way I wanted to, but I feel the need to question exactly what boundaries the show is breaking. And the worst one, by far, is the implication of Osha and May's birth. It's heavily implied that they were born out of the Force, or that their mother found some way to manipulate the Force to create life. And I can't accurately express how much I hate this. For one thing, and this is taking Legends into account, no single person other than Anakin Skywalker are born out of the Force. The whole reason why Anakin was so special was not just because of his turbulent life and his desire to save others. Those things, on top of the fact that he was the Chosen One himself. The Chosen One who had the potential to grow stronger than even Master Yoda, but was hamstringed by his attachments and frustration with the Jedi. That's why he was the core of the prequels. I'm not going to pretend as if Anakin is totally ruined now because of the show, but whereas I like Anakin being this emotionally complicated Chosen One, Osha and May are just not deserving of all of the attention they're getting in the lore. They don't feel especially powerful or have anything that screams important about them. They're two estranged sisters who have a weird relationship. So to suggest that this sacred principle in the lore can be easily forgotten if it means giving the illusion of making these characters more appealing is a total waste. Anakin is also special because, if you remember in Season 3 of the Clone Wars, he literally meets the Arbiters of the Force itself, and he is determined to be the Chosen One because he contained both the son and the daughter. I don't think that that was just there for the sake of it. It was there to show just how much potential Anakin had before becoming Vader, and perhaps even a glimpse of his true destiny. Even if they did end up being better in a later season, I would still question why they pulled this kind of trigger in the lore. It's a special place. It's not something to just be wasted on a show that wasn't good enough for a continuation. Something I thought I was going to like was the new Coven of Witches that they were introducing. The idea that there are other Force users in the galaxy and how they might practice the Force is something I do want to explore in canon, but this just sucked. The way Mother Anastasia basically dismissed the most well-known interpretation of the Force and suggested instead that it was actually a thread that you can pull and pluck and whatever. I don't dislike the interpretation, but I just don't like how far the writers went to try and legitimize this as some grander understanding of the Force. It grew pretty annoying pretty quick. She's constantly repeating herself, pretty much. As if some coven of witches knows a deeper truth than the Jedi, who have existed for millennia, or even the Sith for that matter. It's arrogant and does a complete disservice to a topic that has remained pretty unchanged for a long time. It comes off, to me at least, as completely unnecessary, because this doesn't establish much more than the existence of other Force cults. The notion too that this coven somehow unlocked the secret to creating life itself is just undeserving. One of the challenges for the Sith in Legends was that immortality was something beyond most of them. They would possess places and people, and even long-living Sith like Vitiate died as well. It wasn't a simple thing, perhaps because the Force didn't allow it. One of the things that made Anakin's birth such an anachronism is also the heavy implication the novel Darth Plagueis makes in suggesting that Plagueis, drunk in his newfound mastery over midichlorians, attempted to create a forceful being. This is never confirmed, but it is interesting to suggest that the living Force would recoil so hard from Plagueis' intrusion that it would react by creating the purported Chosen One destined to destroy the Sith, or that Plagueis even reached such heights to where he literally could create life. My biggest gripe with the lore, however, is actually not the whole implication that Anakin is just not that special anymore, but it rather has to do with the Sith. For the longest time, I feel like the Sith were something that Disney just didn't seem to care about at all. They haven't added much aside from expanding on Darth Vader, calling Kylo Ren a Sith, and now we are finally seeing them in the spotlight, and I fucking hate this interpretation. Everything Kimir says in the show feels like a total contradiction of the Rule of Two. This is something I was originally dismissive of, seeing as Lucas absolutely loved milking the rule of two in mentions and explaining the logic of the Sith, but the more I thought about it, I became more unsatisfied. The whole reason why the rule of two was created, both in canon and in legends, was to hide the Sith so they could amass power and take their revenge on the Jedi. Kemir, on the other hand, lives about 100 years before the Phantom Menace, and instead of doing anything towards a Sith grand plan, he is instead talking about how he wants to be free. The Jedi won't accept me as I am, or whatever he said. I despise this, because if this is the representation that a fascinating faction like the Sith are getting in canon, it just doesn't do them any service. All they're painting the Sith as are selfish killers, and that's it. It completely ignores what previous Sith Lords did and just what position they were in during this era. He slides in, murders some people, and then talks about how he wants to be free. That's it? Really? What's the point of the rule of two if the Sith we're seeing is just there because his rights are not respected? It's just too shallow for me to believe in it. And to bring Darth Plagueis into this again, there are several monologues of his explaining just why the Jedi and the Republic need to be overthrown, and he adds so much detail to the Force itself and how the Sith interpret it. And I know this is something that is honestly kind of hard to beat. And I don't even think they were constrained by the format. They could have explored some of these things, but they were much busier talking about how he wanted to be free. The irony of me complaining about a Sith being selfish is not lost on me, but I'm just so disappointed how we go from the mastermind-like planning of both Plagueis and Sidious to a somewhat emo guy. The other irony about Kemir is that I was not able to forget about that mind wipe. I find it so problematic because, as I said earlier, it's pretty convenient plot armor for May to still be around for season 2, but also because Sith kill all witnesses. Did it not occur to the writers that the whole point of the rule of two was to keep them hidden? So why the hell does Kemir just give May a mind wipe? I'm not against him revealing himself as a Sith, because it follows the assumption that there will be no survivors. Bane and Xana did it, so why the hell is he suddenly for a mind wipe? If anything, a Sith would have used May against Osha to drive her further into the dark side, no? I can't believe that this is what Disney thinks what a well-written Sith is, and tries to impose this on the lore, where various other examples they could draw from exist, but they just don't. There's also the lightsaber bleeding scene in the final episode, which I just didn't think was very good. I've been led to believe that if Darth Vader is pouring all of his hate and anger into this process of bleeding a lightsaber crystal, it looks really intense. The fallen chosen one has to do all of that, and all Osha needs to do is kill her former master. It implies that all a person really needs to do is something egregious because the dark side pushed them to, and so why doesn't Anakin's lightsaber turn red during Order 66? I know it's because the concept didn't exist when Revenge of the Sith released, nor did the concept exist in Legends, but these are the kind of details that keep the lore consistent. Disregarding lore to really show the viewer just who is becoming evil now, hey guys, make sure you don't miss it, is ridiculous. I'm also aware that there is another forgotten lightsaber bleeding scene that happened in Jedi Survivor, and I'm not gonna play favorites here. Darth Vader's process just appears far better than getting angry and popping up blood vessels, so to speak. I believe they all should look like that, or at least have a bit more complexity than being mad. The one thing they actually managed to get right about the lore of the show was cortosis. They actually portrayed it how it's supposed to be. It's a metal that can temporarily disable lightsabers. There you go, that's all it is. And that's all it needed to be. And there are probably other issues that I could find, but the ones mentioned are the most critical ones for me. This whole part is called It's Supposedly Star Wars because it tries hard to be Star Wars, yet it just brings no benefit to the lore. It reminds me of the same play with The Last Jedi, where the focus of subverting the expectations of the viewer ruined characters, created several unwelcome questions for the lore, like why not just ram every ship with FTL, and tried so hard to be its own thing whilst ignoring the fact it was Star Wars. The cheap excuse I'm willing to give The Last Jedi is that if it wasn't Star Wars, it probably wouldn't have been that bad, but I am totally unwilling to give this to the Acolyte. Because even if it wasn't Star Wars, this show still wouldn't be good. And there's also the matter of the time period. It was totally and completely ignored, and it feels like it's there because, well, they wanted the Sith to be in the show. This ought to be an exciting era to explore in live action, no less, but it just isn't. There's no depth, there's not much at all. This show is so laser focused on the twins that it really misses the forest for the trees.
No slang and I.
The burning question I had when I started watching this series was if it really was as bad as people said it was. Surely it would have merited some good things, but as I watched, I only grew more disappointed. So the burning question I have now is, does this show merit a second season? And my answer is no. The writing just isn't good enough to keep me intrigued, and thinking a little too hard about the whole show just pretty much ruins it. The characters were also just not that good. Even good characters are given something odd to them, which makes me lean more on the negative. And to my surprise, Leslie Headland has actually opened up about future narrative plans if the show kept going, and to say the least, it was bleak, and it makes me glad that the whole show was cancelled. Yoda, of all people, would help cover up the whole incident with Kimir and Saul. There was also talk about Plagueis showing up in the second season, and I mean, he is in the cameo right there, but lack of comments about him leave him more in a maybe, but seeing as every other character was mid at best, I wouldn't trust them to do a monolith like Plagueis any justice. Other future plans included, though no official confirmation if this is true, that somehow Osha and May might be linked to plots that would eventually lead to Palpatine, which I absolutely just fucking hate the thought of. There was also talk of Kimir perhaps not being a Sith at all, which makes a lot of sense, but I wish the show didn't so boldly proclaim Kimir to be a Sith. He even states it himself. Any potential the show had to get better is dead now, and if we have to rely on future seasons to maintain interest when the first season was such an unmitigated disaster, then I think it's only fair the show doesn't warrant any continuation. And with that, I'm glad it's over. This was not the most ball-grading experience ever, but in the end, The Acolyte represents everything wrong with Disney Star Wars. It is a huge disservice to the franchise and well-established lore that angers me as a fan, while not even being a good show. All in all, in a proverbial tier list, this would go straight to the bottom of F tier. I'm not the first to say it, but this is genuinely a new low for Star Wars. And so, of course, the question we are left with is, could it get worse? And this time the answer was yes, it really, really did. And it's a real shame, because I didn't want to hate this show. I thought this was actually one of those few shows I was actually looking forward to. It actually seemed fairly interesting. We were finally going to get some more developments about the Sith, and the whole premise seemed interesting. But, well, I think I've said enough.